a really, really interesting infomercial from about April 2013 that the Dove company put out. And in this infomercial, there was an FBI forensic artist in a room with a curtain placed between him and the subject whose portrait he was drawing. A woman came in and she described herself. And as she described herself, he drew an image. She described her features, she described what she looks like, her face, and she said, my eyes go this way, my mouth, my teeth are a little crooked. She described herself, he drew the picture. This happened after a few minutes. He had her image, he still didn't see her, she left the room. The next woman came in, she described herself, and he drew another image and another image. This happened with 6 women. After the women went out, they all interacted with each other and they spent a few minutes getting to know one another. And then he called in, one by one a woman was called in, and this time she didn't describe herself, but she described one of the other women who she had just interacted with. So Sarah described Linda, Linda described Rachel, and she sits there and she describes Linda, and she says, oh, her face lights up when she smiles and her mouth is a little, and he creates that image. And again, the forensic artist does not see his subjects. At the end of this, 6 women, he puts each portrait side by side. The portrait that the woman herself, how she had described herself, alongside how someone else had described her. And all of them are side by side. He calls the women in. And you see the reaction, and the women, they look at the pictures and tears come to their eyes and they cry. He sees how it has captured them, but what is fascinating is that in every single portrait, the woman came out more beautiful when she was described by someone else. When she described herself, she was harsher about herself, about her flaws, and when someone else described her, they only saw the beauty. And the tagline was, Dove, you're more beautiful than you think. And as women, we're more beautiful, we're more strong, we're more powerful, we're more resilient, we're more everything than we think. But we don't always feel it, and we don't always believe it. So how do we get to that point where we can believe it? We spend our life saying, I need to lose 5 more pounds to look good. I need to get that promotion to feel good. I need to finish the book to feel accomplished. We spend our life thinking about, with a litany of issues of what we need to do in order to improve ourselves. So how do we feel good about ourselves? What is it that we need to, how can we make, because in this infomercial, what happened was when the women described their colleagues, they saw their character, and they brought their character to their face. And they saw, she smiles and her eyes light up. So their panimiyut, they saw the internal, and it was reflected on the panim. And panimiyut and panim actually share the same root word. How could it be that your external and your internal, how could they be from the same root? Because that's what it's all about. If you are genuine, and if you know where you're going and your direction in your life, your internal and your external truly do look alike and truly are one and the same. So when we think about how do we get to that point, how do we achieve that internal strong feeling, and how do we become that ideal Jewish woman, what comes to mind? Where do we see what an ideal Jewish woman is all about? Well, you're all in this class, so I assume it's because you all know the famous prayer, the Eshet Chayil. The Eshet Chayil that's sung every single Friday night. Let's look at this and let's learn some lessons. Eshet Chayil, well, we don't have to look at that just yet. Well, let's look at this in general. We're going to look at that specifically in a moment. Eshet Chayil was written by Shlomo HaMelech as an ode to all Jewish women. Each verse is written actually with another letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's 22 verses going through all the letters of the alphabet in order. The Medrash on Eshet Chayil, well, first we're told that the first time Eshet Chayil was actually said was by Abraham as a eulogy for Sarah. Sarah died and Abraham said the words of Eshet Chayil, and Eshet Chayil represented everything, all the qualities in Eshet Chayil was embodied in Sarah. The Medrash on Eshet Chayil Yalchot HaMechira applies all the verses to 19 Jewish women, each one epitomizing another quality, teaching us that it's possible to take various qualities from different women. We can't do everything, but we can do something, and we can learn something from every woman, every one of the women that are mentioned. Some say that Eshet Chayil is in reference to Ruth. Others say the great-grandmother of Shlomo. While others, the Metzudei Tzion says, Shlomo penned it for his mother Bathsheba, who rebuked him because, as we know, Shlomo HaMelech, he was responsible for the establishment of the Beit HaMikdash. And then the morning of the dedication of the Beit HaMikdash, when the Kohanim, when the priests came to the temple to do the service, they couldn't get in because the key was under the pillow of Shlomo HaMelech. And Shlomo HaMelech had slept in the morning of the dedication. So they didn't know what to do. You don't wake up a king. So they went to Bathsheba. They went to Shlomo HaMelech's mother. And they said to Bathsheba, we need to wake him up. So Bathsheba was the one who ultimately, we are told, woke up Shlomo HaMelech, and she rebuked him because he had slept in because one of his wives had been playing music the night before and it kept him up and he slept in. So he accepts that rebuke and he actually acknowledges that rebuke, and he writes this whole Eshet Chayil, some say, as recognition and admiration for his mother. According to Kabbalah, Eshet Chayil refers to the relationship between the Jewish people and Hashem. Yalkut Shimoni explains it as referring to the Torah. The Zohar explains it referring to the collective Jewish soul. The Shar HaKolah writes that it refers to Shabbos, specifically the feminine energy contained therein. And Hasidus, we speak a lot about the masculine energy, the feminine energy. Right now, the masculine energy is dominant in the world. In the times of Mashiach, the feminine energy will be dominant, but that's a whole other talk that we're not going to be discussing now with Eshet Chayil. So for all those reasons, Eshet Chayil is sung even when no women are present. So we know that there are Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 ways to look at Torah. You put a bunch of Jews together, of course, you're going to have multiple interpretations. And there are so many ways to look at Eshet Chayil. So for the purpose of today, I'm just going to pick one or two, and I hope that you will learn something from, it will resonate, some of the points will resonate individually with each of you, and you'll take something out of it. To that end, though, we're told, Kol ha'omer davar b'shem amro me'vigol la'olam. Whoever says something in the name of whoever taught it to them brings redemption to the world. We're constantly, the rabbis will always say, Rav Meir said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, this one said in the name of someone else. When you learn something, it's very important to acknowledge and to recognize who you learned it from. So I use multiple sources for today, but I do want to thank specifically someone by the name of Sarah Esther Crisp, who had incredible insights into Eshet Chayil and was gracious enough to allow me to share many of them with you all. Eshet Chayil miyimsa, a woman of valor who can find. We're not just seeking a person, we're seeking a way. We're seeking a derech, a way to improve ourselves and to become the person that we're meant to be and utilize our potential in this world. Chayil, a woman of valor. It's a very interesting word to use. Why use the word valor? You would think a righteous woman who can find, a noble woman who can find, a generous woman, a compassionate woman, a loving woman, a learned woman. Why does it use the word valor? So obviously, there's got to be lessons we can learn from that. When we see the word chayil mentioned in the Torah, in Shemot, it's mentioned with regard to judges, and the Ramban there explains chayil to mean someone with outstanding character. The Das Mikra, another commentator, says it refers to those who are trustworthy and feared God. Okay, so a woman is outstanding character, trustworthy, fears God. That's wonderful. What else is chayil similar to? What is the word that comes to mind when you think about that? Soldier. Exactly. A chayil is a soldier. What is a soldier? A soldier is someone who is brave, someone who is ready to fight, someone who goes onto the battlefield to conquer the enemy, someone who faces their enemy even when they're afraid. The fear doesn't allow them it does not prevent them from doing what needs to be done. Someone who thinks and plans ahead, someone with good strategy, someone who knows how to follow orders, someone who knows how to give orders, someone who knows, understands what their mission is and believes in it to the core. That is a soldier. How fitting is that to describe the Jewish woman? We are all of that. Each woman is that. We can accomplish, we can strategize, we can focus, we are determined, we have our eye on the prize. This is who, at our core, we all are. But how do we find that? How do we tap into our core, that our internal character, our pnimiyot, to become that woman? As Shlomo says, Eshet chayil miyimsa, a woman of valor who can find. In order to receive something, in order to find something, you must know what you're looking for. You have to look for something. In Tractate Megillah, there's a pasuk, Yogati matzasi al tamin, lo yogati matzasi al tamin, yogati matzasi tamin. If one says, I have searched but I haven't found, you do not believe them. If someone says, I haven't searched but I've found, you believe them. You do not believe them. But if someone says, I have searched and I have found, then you believe them. Finding and achieving our goals doesn't just happen. Wonderful things don't just happen in self-growth and improvement. We have to find them, we have to search for them, we have to develop ourselves, we have to look. So now that we know that we can do this, we can get this, let's look further and see what are the keys, what are the lessons. The first sentence it says there is, what does it say there? Eishes chayil miyimsa, that her beauty exceeds that of pearls. What is the translation that's used there? The value exceeds far of pearls, because I told Sarah she has to use a literal translation for that sentence, because most times you'll open Eshes Chayil and it will say her value exceeds that of rubies, that of precious gems. It sounds more eloquent. But it is important that we use the word pearls. What is the word for pearl in Hebrew? Penina. Penina shares the same root letters as panim. And what were we speaking about before? Pnimiyot. The face and the internal beauty. These are seemingly opposite, but in fact they're not. As we said before, when you're genuine, they're both the same. So what is a pearl? Who knows how a pearl is formed? An oyster sits at the bottom of the ocean. A foreign substance comes into the pearl, and what does an oyster do? It has a choice. Either it's going to reject this foreign substance, the foreign substance will come and destroy the oyster. It could be some food, it can be some sort of debris lying on the surface of the water. It could be anything. The oyster then creates something called nacre, and it creates this nacre and it layers it over the pearl. And gradually this substance that the oyster has created covers the substance. It covers this foreign substance slowly, slowly, slowly. A freshwater pearl takes between 1 and 6 years to form. A saltwater pearl can take between 5 and 20 years to form. And what happens after that 1 to 6 years or 5 to 20 years? From this little piece of debris that entered the oyster, from this little piece of food or whatever it was that could have harmed the oyster, what are you left with? A beautiful pearl. It is from the challenges that we all have. It is from our difficulties. It is from our trying times that the substance of beauty is created. That is the woman. We take our challenges and we don't throw them out. We don't spit them out. We don't just rail about them, against them and complain. We take them and create something from it. We create beauty from something that isn't instinctively beautiful. We turn our negative into a positive. It is an ongoing process that improves as we age and becomes more valuable. And every pearl is unique. What's the difference between a fake pearl and a real pearl? You take a fake pearl and you can have 20 fake pearls that are all exactly the same. They're the same in color, they're the same in texture. A real pearl is grainy, it's uneven. No two authentic pearls are exactly the same. Their coloring is not 100% right. Their shading, their size is not even. And yet, which one's valuable? You can have that perfect little pearl, fake pearl, you're not interested in it. You want the flawed, beautiful, authentic pearl. That's the Jewish woman. We're not perfect. We are flawed, we have issues, we are trying, we are troubled, but we're the authentic. We are the valuable ones. Our value exceeds that of pearls. So we need to face our challenges for growth of development and spiritual improvement and look at them as positives and look at our obstacles as ways that we can become better and we can achieve something that was far superior to what we had initially. We also are taught that every letter in the Hebrew alphabet, it's not just random letters, but there's spiritual messages in every single letter, even in the way that our letters are formed. So what does Eshet Chayil begin with? What letter? Aleph. What is Aleph? The numerical value of Aleph is 1. One individual, one action. Every single person counts. Every single individual act is important. We are taught that if you save one person, it's as if you save the entire world. Everyone is considered olam maleh, a world unto themselves. And every one of us needs to believe, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, because of me, the world was created. The Baal Shemtov tells us that a person can live for 70, 80 years for the sole purpose of doing one mitzvah for someone else. That could be your whole purpose that you're alive, is some opportunity comes up and you've overcome one challenge, done one mitzvah, and that could be the entire purpose of your life. Every single one makes a difference. An older man was walking along the beach one morning, as was his custom, and he saw in the distance a little girl that was bending over and getting up, bending over, getting up. So he assumed she was like dancing, practicing some sort of exercise. And he gets closer and he sees that the little girl is bending over and she's picking up a starfish and she's throwing it out into the ocean. She walks a few more steps, she picks up another starfish and she throws it further into the ocean. He goes up to her and he says, "Young lady, may I ask, what are you doing?" And the little girl says, "Well, the sun has come up, the tide is going out, and there are miles of shoreline here, and there are starfish that have come onto the shore, and if I don't throw them back in, they're going to die. They can't live without the water." He said, "Young girl, I mean, nice thought, but there are miles, as you said, there's miles of shoreline. There are thousands of starfish." Please don't tell me that's my phone. And I can't even get annoyed at anyone. So he said, "Young girl, you can't, what are you doing? You can't possibly make a difference with what you're doing." The little girl smiles, she bends over, she picks up a starfish, she throws it into the sea, and as she does, she says to him, "It sure made a difference to that one." We can't change the world necessarily, but we can change one. And every one makes a difference. The Aleph teaches us the power of one. Don't think if I can only do one, it's not worth it. Because we need to know, we need to know another thing about Aleph. Aleph shares same letters as the word Aleph. What does Aleph stand for? 1,000. How could 1 and 1,000 have the same root letter? It doesn't make sense. Well, everything in Torah makes sense. You just got to study hard enough and then you figure it all out. But there's a beautiful lesson we learn from that. In order to get to 1,000, 1,000 represents growth. But in order to get to 1,000, you start with 1. You start with 1, and step by step, from taking that 1, a small change can make a huge difference in a step by step. As many of you may know, the story of the man who approaches 2 women and says, "I'd like to give you 2 lovely ladies a gift. I want to give you either $1 million or a penny a day that doubles for a month." So Deborah, woman number 1, is like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing, I'll take the $1 million." Ruth, number 2, says, "I'd take the penny a day." Deborah says, "So are you crazy?" She says, "No, I'll take a penny a day." She takes a penny a day. The woman has $1 million. Day number 1, Deborah's looking at Ruth like, "You're the world's biggest idiot." Day number 2, day number 3, day number 5. By day number 7, Deborah's got $1 million. Ruth has got $1.27. 2 weeks later, Deborah's got $1 million. Ruth has $166.83. And I'm reading it here to make sure I get it exactly right. Deborah's so happy with herself. Of course, you just go for the big picture right away. Don't worry about the little things. What happens at week number 3? At week number 3, Deborah's got the $1 million, and Ruth has $20,971.51. Okay. Day number 28, Deborah has $1 million. Ruth has $2,684,355.55. With 1 penny, that doubles every single day. Exponential growth is something we can all achieve. And we learn from the Aleph. Let's look at that Aleph. If all of you, I asked you to make sure that the Aleph, the first letter was highlighted. If you look at the letter Aleph, every letter in the Hebrew alphabet actually is made up of other letters. So the Aleph is made up of, who can see what it's made up of? A Yud at the top, a Vav in the center, and a Yud below. What does a Yud represent? Hashem. This is not necessarily a question and answer. If you don't want to answer, just stay silent, I'll answer for you. A Yud represents Hashem. There is a God above us who foresees what is happening and who plans our future. There is a God below us who is responsible for every action that happened in our life. It's because God was part of that. There is a Vav that's connecting our past and our present. We are just the middle road between what came before us, what's coming ahead of us. It's all interconnected, and it's all part of Hashem's plan. So we shouldn't get worked up about what happens in our life. We do what we can, but we understand that at the end of the day, first and foremost, there's a God in the world, and God is there with us, above us, below us, in our present. Every step of the way, Hashem is there. And with knowing that, and knowing that Hashem is there every step of the way, and there's a spark of divinity within each one of us, we can become that strong person who impacts 1,000. We can start from the 1, go into the thousands, and we can change the world. There is a line from Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, and he says, "When I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. I found it was difficult to change the world, so I tried to change the nation. When I found I couldn't change the nation, I began to focus on changing my town. I couldn't change the town, and as an older man, I tried to change my family. Now, as an old man, I realize the only thing I can change is myself. And suddenly I realize that if long ago I had changed myself, I could have made an impact on our town. That impact could have changed the nation, and I indeed could have changed the world. In order to reach 1,000, we need to begin at 1. Okay, pasuk number 2. Eishes Chayil is incredible, and I've got to be honest, when Sarah first said to me, will you speak about Eishes Chayil? I said, I've got like 1,000,001 things I can speak about, but Eishes Chayil is something like, I just take it for granted. I just say it. I'm being honest. I haven't really studied it. And it was something, and then she said, no, the women really want to talk about Eishes Chayil. So I said, okay, whatever you want, I'll do it. And what was amazing was to see how much there actually is on Eishes Chayil and how powerful and deep, and there are so many lessons and so many ways to look at this. So even though we're only going through a couple, I encourage you to do your own research afterwards and look it up, because there are so many beautiful thoughts on the Eishes Chayil. The heart of a husband trusts in her, and he should have no lack of spoil. This pasuk, by all accounts, refers to Sarah. There's a commentary that the entire text, as we said before, is a reference to Sarah. The Medrash Shemtov says that. But Yalkut Shimoni tells us that how by studying Sarah's life, we can gain beautiful insights into our own character and into our own personal goal. All of her spiritual potential we can tap into. As descendants of Sarah, we have her in our DNA. So however amazing Sarah was, we're a part of her. From the newly converted to the most righteous woman, we're all equally got a little bit of Sarah in us. And so when we say that the Eish Chayil has Sarah's entire life and character and all the qualities that Sarah's got, we've all got a little bit of that, and we can all tap into that. So we meet Sarah as a first Jew. She was a matriarch, she was intelligent, she was resourceful, she was, they say, the most beautiful woman that lived. She was a luminary. Let's look a little deeper. On the words of Sarah's life in Chayei Sarah, when it talks about Sarah's life, what does it say? It says, Shnei Chayei Sarah. What does Rashi say about that? He says, Kulan Shavin Latova. All of her years were equally good. Now, at first glance, that would make sense. She was an incredible woman. She was a matriarch of the Jewish people. So all her years were good. But she was called Sarai. But let's look a little deeper. Sarah, her father Haran, was burnt in a furnace by Nimrod, who was turned in by her own grandfather Terach. She abandoned her wealth, like Rabbi Akiva's wife Rachel, to follow her husband Abraham through the desert, traveling, pitching tents from one place to the other. She wandered through the heat and the loneliness of the desert. She was kidnapped. She was placed in a box and smuggled into Egypt, kidnapped by Avimelech and almost violated by him. Her brother Lot was a dishonest individual who cheated her husband, and that was her only claim to family. She was a nomad, constantly in the heat, pitching tents, serving guests, no matter what time of day or night it was. Her maidservant Hagar, when she became pregnant, humiliated and embarrassed Sarah. She cried for decades before she had a child. And then, when she thought that son, she finally had that child, what happened? He was sacrificed, or he was nearly sacrificed. And when a vision came to her that he was on that altar, what happened to Sarah? Her heart left her body and she died. So, which part exactly can we say was equally good? I think it's a little stretch initially to look at that and say, equally good? The heat of the desert, the barren years, the being without family, being without wealth initially, all of it seemed to me excruciatingly difficult. But Rashi tells us her years were equally good. All of her years were good. Perhaps she had spiritual satisfaction to offset her challenges. Another name the Torah gives us for Sarah, because when the Chumash talks about Haran, he says he was the father of Yiscah. We were told Yiscah is another name for Sarah. Yiscah means sight. She had a depth of insight and vision, and she did not let her day-to-day challenges distract from her vision and goals when things didn't work out. She davened for close to a century for a child. It wasn't realistic, it wasn't normal, it wasn't sane. She was probably the laughing stock of everybody around her, but she didn't care. She was like a chayal. She was like a soldier. I am going to fight this to the end. I have a vision. I am going to take this on. So the only interaction, even with Hashem, was some could perceive it as a rebuke, but it didn't deter her. She kept at it because she believed in it, and she believed truly at her core in her mission. From Sarah we learn that a good life is not necessarily an easy life. It's a life that we do the best that we can do with what we are given. We keep focused, we keep trying, we keep praying. Whatever we can't laugh off like Sarah laughed, we accept with grace and complete faith that is all part of God's plan for us. We also see that she partnered equally with Abraham to spread a message. She wasn't merely just beautiful and glamorous. We're actually told that when Abraham and Sarah would travel in the desert, Abraham would pitch Sarah's tent before his own, because her teachings were on a higher spiritual level than his, and out of respect for what she could offer, her tent came up before his tent. So she was a role model. She each worked independently. She was an incredible woman, a righteous woman, who had merited to have obviously the 3 constant miracles that took place as a result of her. But our view of role models and society's view of role models are different. This is interesting. When the angels asked Abraham, "Where is your wife Sarah?" What did Sarah say? What did Abraham say? Abraham said, "She's in the tent." She was powerful, she was respected, but yet it didn't diminish her to say to be in the tent. She didn't look at being the leader, or the Jewish female leader, as exclusionary to being in the tent, to being a homemaker, to being a wife, to being, please God, eventually she was a mother. She knew that Kol Kvoda Bat Melech Panima, the beauty of a Jewish woman is within. Internally, she had the moral compass and wisdom to know what the priorities were, and to know how to balance and to act, and to feel comfortable and equally present in her multiple roles. That pasuk begins with the letter Bet. What does Bet represent? The number what? 2. That means making space for someone else, because 2 means it's not 1. It means understanding that there's more to life. First we have to feel good about ourselves, but there's more to life than ourselves. We have to make space for someone else. It's spelled out, it's like the word bayit, which means home. I'm trying to get through it all very quickly. There's a misconstrued notion that a woman's place is in the home. The truth is that figuratively, the woman is the home. It doesn't matter where she is. Her mindset, her values, her education, her attitude, that creates the environment of those around her. So the woman creates what is the home. It doesn't matter where she physically is every minute of the day, but she sets the tone for those around her. She is the bayit for those around her. It says in Proverbs, Chachmat Nashim Banta Beita, that the wisdom of a woman builds a house. Just as a woman literally houses a baby inside of her, so figuratively, after the child is born, she houses the values that that child will grow up with. A beautiful connection is made. The word for womb in Hebrew is rechem. And it's the same word, root word, as rachamim, meaning empathy. When we house another, we literally have empathy for them and create a safe space for them. This allows us to be other-centered. It's like the letter Bet, to think about someone else other than ourselves. This comes from our pnimiyut, from our core. If our core is centered, then we can impact and influence others and be there for someone else. Pnimiyut, this notion of being mindful, of being present and internally focused, tells us not to fall prey to the generalizations and expectations of the world, its stereotypes, and not to put anyone into a mold. There was a fascinating study done that I read in a journal from 1950, where 150 college students were brought into a room and 30 pictures of women were put on a screen. And they were asked to categorize them in 5 categories, based on, which were the 5 categories? Beauty, intelligence, likability, character, and ambition. So these 150 college students took these 30 girls and they ranked them. They weren't given a name, they were just given an image. 6 months later, they brought the college students back. They added another 5 students, 5 pictures to shake it up a little bit. But this time, they gave names to these 30 images. They gave 5 of them Jewish names. They gave Sarah Goldberg, Rachel Rubenstein. They gave 5 of them Italian names, 5 of them Irish names, and the rest of them American names. Like, typical Smith and John and typical names. And then they asked them to categorize them again. And what was fascinating was that the results were modified based on their stereotypes. With the Jewish names, there was a decrease in likability, character, and beauty, and an increase in intelligence and ambition. With the American names, a decrease in some of the others, and an increase in likability and beauty. So it was a fascinating study, obviously not done for the purposes of this class, but to me that was that notion of we put ourselves in stereotypes. We stereotype ourselves, we generalize ourselves and our accomplishments, we stereotype those around us. A few weeks ago we did the parsha of Joseph and his brothers. to me, I think it's fascinating that his brothers came.
You have one text message. It's from Revivo.
His brothers came to speak to Joseph. They hadn't seen him for years and years and years. But you're talking about intelligent, wise men who were the fathers of the tribes of Israel. They came to see him, and you had a group of brothers, and not one of them, nowhere does it say, one turned to the other and said, his voice sounds a little familiar, he reminds me a little bit of Yosef, it makes me feel a little nostalgic, those eyes are the same as our brother, that voice is the same as our brother. Not one of them, nowhere do you see, or nowhere that I have seen, is there any even reference that anybody picked up and said, and you're not talking about little kids, you're talking about adults who were intelligent adults and they couldn't see any resemblance. How many stories do we know about Holocaust survivors that someone saw someone in the street and it was a long lost child from decades before? Not one brother noticed any similarity of Yosef, because it's the same mindset. They came to the ruler of the land, the viceroy of the land, second in command. They didn't even in their wildest dreams even think that it possibly could be Yosef. It was so far removed from their reality that it didn't even enter into their consciousness. So it wasn't on any level, because they had this notion of what is and what isn't. And it's what we do all the time. And that is also, okay, I'll skip that point. But there is that, to me, that's an incredible lesson, that we don't look at the surface. We have to look at what's beneath the surface. When we look at others, we look at what's beneath the surface. And so Shabbos, which is when we sing Eishes Chayil, that's our day when we think about what's really there. Not what the rest of the week is like and what our notions are of what the way the world should run. Shabbos is when we understand Hashem is in control. This is what it's really about. The rest is just generalization, stereotypes, and our views of the way the world works. But we sing Eishes Chayil and we understand the core, we understand the truth. The greatest gift Sarah gave Abraham was to challenge him. When she thought to send Yishmael away, she challenged Abraham. And what did Hashem say? Shema b'kala. Listen to her voice, Hashem tells her. Hashem doesn't say listen to her words. Hashem doesn't say listen to what she says. Hashem says listen to her voice. The voice, Shema b'kala, is the same words as Kabbalah. Her voice is her Kabbalah, her intuition, her nevuah, her prophecy. She knows what's right, her tone of voice. As women, we have the gift, but we should use our gift, not just with our words, but with our tone. We could impact so many people, so many injustices in the world, our family, our friends, our co-workers, whoever we need to impact and whoever we need to advocate for. But it's not enough our words. We have to make sure that we use the voice of Sarah, that our tone allows us to present our message. And if our motives are pure and we truly want to connect, Hashem helps us. We need to use our voice to help us in action and in prayer. My grandfather, Rabbi Chaim Gutnick, was a very well-known, respected rabbi in Australia. And he tells a story of in the 1950s. He was then living in Sydney, Australia, post-Holocaust survivor. He was a young man with a few little children. He was in his father-in-law's jewelry business, but on the side he was doing rabbinics. I think Karen may know this story, and Greta. But if you do, bear with me. So he would part-time do some rabbinic work on the side. There was a city in Australia that you may have heard of called Adelaide. It's sort of the middle of nowhere now. You could imagine 1950, that it was really the middle of nowhere. It was completely very small Jewish community. The Jewish community approached a rabbi in Sydney and said, of Adelaide, and said, it's 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, we don't have a rabbi. Either the rabbi had left, they were in between rabbis, and they said, we need someone for Rosh Hashanah. Can you recommend somebody? And Rabbi Parish, the rabbi then, said, well, there's this young rabbi, Rabbi Gutnick. He doesn't yet have his own synagogue, but he's dynamic, and I think he'd be great for you. So they go to my grandfather, they called him up, and they said, will you come and be our rabbi? He had 4 little children at the time. And it's like, I think 1953, 54, 55, around then. And he said, I don't want to leave my kids. They wanted him to come alone. It was expensive. It was difficult. He was going to come alone and stay till after Yom Kippur. And he said, no. They went back to Rabbi Parish and said, what else do you have for us? He said, no. And he said, I think really he's all we've got for you right now. And this is a way to do it. He's a Lubavitch, he's a Chabad rabbi. This is the way we do it. Send a letter to Rabbi Schneerson in New York and say to Rabbi Schneerson, we need a rabbi for your Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And this Rabbi Gutnick, this young 25-year-old rabbi, however he was then, he won't do it. Well, we all know how this story's ending up. So Rabbi Gutnick gets a telegram a few days later that says, I am shocked to hear that a community needs a rabbi and you are not going. And by the way, when you go, look out for the Egyptian Jews. So he knew what that meant. The next day, he was on a plane with 2 bags of 2 suitcases because there was no kosher food or anything that my grandmother had to make for him to keep him satisfied during that trip. And he gets on a plane and he gets to Adelaide. He arrives the night before Rosh Hashanah and he meets with the president and they tell him all the instructions of the shul. And the next morning he says, I want to go to the shul, I want to check out the lay of the land, I want to practice speaking in front of, where I'm standing. He goes into the shul, he goes meets the secretary into the office, and he goes into the sanctuary. And as he goes into the sanctuary, he walks around, he looks around, he sees an elderly woman come in with looks like she's like a 17-year-old girl, but the girl appears to be blind. And the Egyptian woman, or the girl says to him, the Egyptian woman says, where is the most holy place in this room, in this synagogue? So he points to where the Torah scrolls are, and he says, this is the holiest place. The woman leads the blind teenager to the Aron, and the girl bends down and she holds onto the Aron and she starts crying and crying. And so my grandfather leaves out of respect and he goes into the office and he says to the woman, to the secretary, who is that? It's just touched him, the expression on her face, and the girl was crying, and the woman said, I don't know, can you describe it? And he said, oh no, she was dark-skinned, dark-haired, seemed like she was visually impaired. And the woman said, they weren't so politically correct in those days, so he probably said she was blind. So he said, the woman said, I don't know, she's probably part of the Egyptian, I think she's part of the Egyptian community. We don't really have anything to do with the Egyptian Jews. So just leave it. My grandfather was never going to just leave it. He went back into the shul, the woman had left. That night was Rosh Hashanah. And they told him one of the instructions that he had to do was stand at the entrance of the shul as people were leaving to shake everybody's hand and wish everyone, Chag Sameach. So services are over, everybody walks past and everybody comes by. This girl is not there. And he sees a group of people standing in the corner and they don't come up to him. So after the services at the meal, he says to the president of the shul, I noticed there were people that didn't come up to me when everybody went by. What was with that little small group? He says, oh, they're the Egyptian Jews. We don't really have anything to do with them, but Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, this is the only shul in the city, so of course we'll let whoever wants to come, but they're not really, don't worry yourself about it. So of course my grandfather's going to worry himself about it, and the next day at services, instead of waiting for them to come up to him, which they wouldn't, he went over to them, shook their hands, and he's trying to make conversation. He says, oh, I saw a girl yesterday in services, in the shul, and they said, yes, that's, her name is Emily or whatever her name is. So one of them said, he said, but they're not religious at all, so they don't come to synagogue. So he said, well, do any of you know? And he said, yes. He said, well, when you see her, say the rabbi says hello. Of course, the president was very upset that he was interacting with the Egyptian Jews, that there was some big politics in between, and anyway, my grandfather couldn't get that image of that girl out of his mind. Something about her face and something about her expression he was troubled by. Before Rosh Hashanah ended, he said to the president, you need to do me a favor. I want to track down that girl. Find out her number, find out her name. I need to track her down. And they tried to discourage him, they said no. After Rosh Hashanah, finally the president gave him the contact information. He calls the house. It's about 8 o'clock at night. And he calls the house and he says, hi, this is Rabbi Gutnick. I'm here for Rosh Hashanah. I'd like to know, do you have a girl in your house? Name, I understand, is Emily. I'd like to speak. Phone goes dead. He tries again. And he says, hello, this is Rabbi. Phone goes dead. My grandfather's like, okay, something here, and he couldn't let it go. The president had given him the name and the address. He took the address, and he says he went in a taxi, and he remembers in those days it was super expensive to take a taxi, and it cost him £3 or whatever it was there. He went in a taxi to this woman's house, and by this point it's about 9:30 at night, and he knocks on the door, and as the door opens, he sticks his foot in the door. And the mother opens the door. And he says, hi, I'm Rabbi Gutnick. And he starts making chit-chat with her. And he says, can I come in? So, of course, at that point, she says, okay, my grandfather's quite a charming individual. And so she invited him in. And then he had a connection with an Egyptian rabbi, so it made her feel more at home. And anyway, he sits in the living room with her. He chats with her for a few minutes. And he says, can I speak with your daughter? She says, I knew that's why you came. She goes out of the room. And this girl walks into the room. And the mother is gracious enough to leave the room and give her daughter privacy with the rabbi. My grandfather says that she wasn't completely blind, like she could see outlines, but she just couldn't see beyond that. So she knew where he was standing, like she could see the outline of his shape. He says the mother walked out, the girl came to my grandfather, she drops to the floor, she starts hugging him around his legs, and she starts crying and crying. And my grandfather gently extricates her and says, tell me my dear, tell me what's wrong? And she says, as you can see, I'm blind. My family just emigrated to Australia from Egypt a few years ago. We have no money, and we're just poor immigrants. There's only one school for the blind here in Adelaide. It's a Catholic school. The people were super gracious, and for the last 2 years, we were free of charge, allowed to be in the school. Over the last few months, the priest has come to us and started talking to me all day about Catholicism and converting, and I should really convert, and I should really convert. And it went in one ear, out the other, and I knew that we're not religious at all. We don't even go to shul on Rosh Hashanah. We don't do anything, but I knew I'm a Jew, and that's not for me. She says things came to a head a couple of weeks ago. They came to my parents and they said, here's the story. It's very, very expensive tuition in a school like this one. Now, if someone's part of our faith, we can make exceptions. If they're not, it's very, very, very expensive. And they named some exorbitant price. And they said, your choice. And she says, my parents didn't know what to do. We're poor Egyptian immigrants. My mother said, but we're Jewish. And this went back and forth. And my father said, she says, I heard my father say, so she'll convert. She needs to go to school. And what can we do? And there's nothing we can do. And she said, and I cried, and I cried. And a few nights ago, I said to God, I'm only a simple Egyptian girl in the middle of Adelaide, but I don't want to give up my religion. Show me a sign, God. Help me out here. What do I do? So she says, the night before Rosh Hashanah, that was my prayer to God. Send me a sign that you're going to help me through this, that I'm not alone, that you hear my voice. She says, and what happened the second day, Rosh Hashanah? Someone came to the house and they said, oh, Emily, you know what's funny? The rabbi asked about you in synagogue. She says, and I was like, God heard me. God heard me. But then where was I going to go with that? And then you came knocking at my door, and you're here. God is listening to me. So of course my grandfather at that point, he called the president, and this is, he said, it was 10:30 at night, and he said, you must come over to this house right now. The president said, Rabbi, I'm in pajamas. And he said, well, if you want a rabbi for Yom Kippur, and you don't want me going back to Sydney tomorrow, you're coming to this house right now. He says, I didn't know how that was going to go over, but, you know, he says, to his credit, the president got dressed, 11 o'clock at night, he showed up to this house. I explained to him the story, and I said, we've all got to do something. I know the communities are not connected, but we're talking about a Jewish girl here who wants to retain her Jewish identity. He says, the president said, give me a couple of days. The community undertook to cover the tuition so the girl could stay in the school but not be coerced to change her religion. So my grandfather kept up an interaction and communication with this girl, and obviously he wrote to the Rebbe and he said, this is what happened, and now I see that you said to me, what about the Egyptian girl? And this is obviously, you knew what was going on, but this is where we're at. And they sent her books about Judaism in Braille, and so she was able to slowly study about Judaism. She kept up a relationship with my grandfather. A year later, one of her communications with him was, they've given me a seeing eye dog. The seeing eye dog is allowing me now to travel alone, to go out in the streets myself. And she says, I know it's crazy, but can I name my dog Gutnik? And my grandfather said, it would be an honor. It would be my honor. So a year after that, she finished studying. She went to Israel. She taught in a school, a Jewish blind school in Israel, and she studied there, taught there. She married a nice Jewish boy and is living in Israel, a nice Jewish life. God heard the voice of Sarah. God heard her voice. God hears our voice. He hears each of us, whatever we say. Our face, our internal, we just have to be focused. We have to be determined. We have to understand that we can do it. We can overcome what comes our way. We can overcome our challenges, and our challenges will create our beautiful pearls that are our lives, that are ourselves. So when we go back to that Dove commercial, that we are more beautiful than you think, yes, we know that. We know that because as a Jewish woman, we have a mission, we have a goal, and we are focused. Thank you.